Welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PI Collaborative Community aims to harmonize approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PI-CC is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law, because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of a discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
Hello, welcome everyone. Wednesday again, ICC. I think this meeting, I believe, will be on fire. There's so much going on in the field, so I'm very glad to see everyone. And we try to touch upon most of the important new topics. And I think many of the our colleagues from the FDA are here, and we have quite a few things to discuss. So why don't we get started right away? Can you see my screen? Perfect. So as always, the material will be shared, of course, on the website, including numerous papers, and please keep sending those. Let's start with a few updates from the agency. First part is that CDER, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, has released compilation, their annual report for the fiscal year 22. A lot of artificial intelligence in drug manufacturing, a discussion paper, and continuous, regulatory and enforcement actions have been compiled. And this is just a pointer to the document. The second part, much more interesting, and I think groundbreaking, it's somewhat of a sound barrier, is that the FDA, of course, engages in numerous activities related to training and or learning. Now, you see some of these are some actual in-practice training sessions. 2 courses are portrayed here. But the part that I really wanted to emphasize that might be of interest to numerous people in pathology is that through a collaboration between the TILS breast cancer community, a few very engaged pathologists, and the US FDA, a first biomarker, H&E-based, morphology-based continuous medical education course has been started, and it is on the assessment of stromal tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. So TILS, as a biomarker, is the first groundbreaking continuous medical education course. And if you're on your computer, I hope this will work. You can scan the barcode here, or you can go straight to the continuous education portal from the FDA. So briefly, this is an accredited course, so you can get up to 3 continuous medical education credits for it. I believe there's 2 or 3 things that I just want to mention. First, a paper will outline what's in here. And all of the three things here were so high yield, they were all 0.1, as you can tell here. So first, this is a clinical context that is provided. There are videos going step by step through. This is like a top-notch course. There are common pitfalls. I think that's probably the most valuable part. And it is all evolving around a paper by Roberto Salgado and, of course, many colleagues from the TILS and breast cancer. So if you're not familiar with the assessment, or if you're just interested in this as an avenue to portray other things through a CME course that's jointly organized with the CME group of the FDA, this is a new way to go. I took the course. It's super informative. It comes with a quiz and a learning assessment afterwards. It's tricky enough, but it's also great. So we're planning to potentially include this also into residence education, and just take a look. I think this is really something groundbreaking. A few other updates that will be provided in much more detail on the website. You may have seen that the dabrafenib and trametinib is approved for pediatric patients with low-grade glioma and a BRAF mutation. So that makes BRAF V600E actionable in another set of tumors. We get to the end of the public health emergency and some of the discussion about LDT in just a second. Several articles around that topic, but I think it fits much better into a discussion about some of the government updates that are coming up in just a minute. The first part is that the White House issued a publication jointly across several different sectors and several different groups that is entitled Bold Goals for US Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing, and how to actually harness some of these large-scale goals. Much too broad, much too complicated to go into detail. But if you're in the biotech field or in biomanufacturing, if you're interested in making that climate appropriate and sustainable, this is the go-to resource, and it has just been released. Two other quick pointers from the government and/or legislation updates. Arkansas has issued a coverage policy for biomarker testing for early detection and management of cancer. And in New York State has approved the first AI-based diagnostic test for breast cancer, both arguably important elements. CMS worked closely with the FDA on accelerated approval payment reforms, and in February, CMS held a 2-day workshop on coverage with evidence development. That workshop and the material is available, and we will provide the link. And at the end of the public health emergency, of course, there's also an update from CMS. Now, I mentioned this quite a bit, and there's a few components that I'd like to provide regarding a VALID Act update. You may have heard or not that the VALID Act is back. It is set to be introduced today, so 3/29/2023. I put there that the future is murky. That is a citation from some of these sources. So as many of you know, this has been at least introduced twice, depending on how you count, and it was cut twice from legislative packages. Actually, the VALID's main Senate champion retired in the meantime. However, the two sponsors reintroduced the bill, and it will likely come out this afternoon, so probably as we speak. And I thought it might be important for this group to learn about some of the facts. The summary is some of the changes based on the omnibus discussions, meaning the end of the year version from the Senate Health Committee, will be likely made. So there will be some changes. That means it is going to be a revised VALID Act. And the bill will likely not include the carve-out for academic medical centers. That's, of course, a big deal and a big change. And it remains to be determined. So as the version drops, probably this afternoon, it's going to be very interesting. Quickly, the key element of one representative test for test developers, an LDT overhaul, and coupling with the fee reauthorization bill all of that remains to be determined, but it's clear that at least from AAMC, there's still willingness to work on policy agreement related to carve-outs and or specific applications or rules related to academic medical centers. And this comes from a quote in the article that we cited earlier. So it is pretty clear that the ballot, whether you're for it or against it, what if it comes or what if it doesn't come? So the agency is definitely moving forward with rulemaking. Dr. Hillebrenner says that they can't longer wait. So there's definitely a need for diagnostic test regulation. While in reverse, the Ballot Act is one of the agency's top legislative priorities, which I think is pretty clear over the last couple of months. And the fact that this is reintroduced so early in the new year probably emphasizes that. So bottom line, LDTs remain controversial. Regulation of high complexity testing seems to be a top priority. Valid or not, probably rulemaking will come. I believe that I just wanted to present this, that we should continue to be actively involved in monitoring and staying informed. It will affect medical practice, and we have had in the past a session called Test Driving the Ballot Act, which was very informative to many because we took just 3 practical use cases. I think it was prostate cancer, NGS, and a PD-L1 stain, to just say what would that look like. And as soon as the new version is out there, we will inform with a broad user email everyone that we will do probably the same with this new updated version. Now, related to this, and the next topic that I think we will hopefully have some time to discuss is the Ballot Act itself, but also some recent regulatory changes may actually trigger us to discuss some of the real tricky changes that are coming. So let me first introduce sort of the topic of remote pathology. And I believe that part is in a separate deck that we wanted to provide to everyone because it is so important. And I think those slides may come, but I think this is probably the very impactful thing other than the ballot being introduced today. So as many of you know, the pandemic has been termed an enabler for remote work. So at the national, state, and federal level, many requirements has changed over the pandemic. Many professional societies, for example, College of American Pathologists, had issued remote sign-out, FAQs, recommendations, validation guides. Many of the people on the call here have used digital pathology. And the current requirement is that as long as you establish appropriate performance or have a home certificate, you can use digital pathology. But the several things are important. We refer quickly to a project that we hosted with PyCC called the CLIA Waiver Project. The link is available, and I believe Ulla can paste it in the chat. So what happened is that at the beginning of the pandemic on March 2020, memorandum was issued that specified that certain regulatory exceptions apply to CLIA laboratories, including the ability to perform remote review, and certain audit requirements were weakened or lifted, so the enforcement discretion was in effect. Now, on March 13th, a federal notice was issued, and I think Ulla will paste the exact text that states specifically when the public health emergency will end, and that will be on May 11th. And interestingly, in December 23rd of 2021, the FDA issued already a transition plan, how we would walk back once the end of the public health emergency is announced, which happened. What will happen after that? There's a 180-day transition period. And after that, we're officially out of the transition period of the public health emergency. So depending on your feeling, you could say the PHE ends here or there, but definitely in November, we are back to what's considered normal from a regulatory perspective. Now, over the pandemic, 72 specific PHE-related guidance documents have been issued, and here's a quick tabulation of what will happen. So 4 guidance documents will remain in effect. Some of these include things that are completely new. This should be table 4, by the way, but we get to that in a second. And the regulatory exceptions that remain in effect are largely new guidances. For example, how to set up a COVID PCR, etc. And then there's the large majority of these exceptions will be walked back. So these will no longer be in effect. There's one that will remain, or a group of guidance documents that will remain in effect for 180 days will then be discontinued. This is where digital pathology is in. So it will be discontinued. We get to that in a second. Then there are others that are planned to be revised. So let's focus briefly on what this means. So for remote work, CMS issued a guidance in early February this year that states in a fairly convoluted wording the following. So CMS has exercised enforcement discretion to facilitate pathologists' ability to review pathology slides remotely without the need for a separate CLIA certificate for the remote location. That's just the description, what has happened. Now they clarify that enforcement discretion is not contingent on public health emergency authority, and CMS will continue to exercise enforcement discretion that allows pathologists to examine digital images and laboratory data at remote locations. So you probably need a law degree to fully understand the wording here, but specifically stating digital pathology slides remotely in the first sentence, decoupling the enforcement discretion from the PHE, but not reiterating pathology slides in the second part implies that images and lab data will continue to be allowed to review remotely with appropriate CLIA guidance, but digital slides have not been specifically mentioned in the second part. So that led to sort of the public perception of this intricate wording that remote work is very complicated. If you think about the relative regulatory complexity, there may be people who reviewed the case in a lab and just key out the result. There are some that may actually review and sign out the cases remotely. Some people may just review the images or lab data, but continue coupling, and glass slides that are digitized and remotely signed out for primary diagnosis is probably in this realm, and it wasn't specified. But at least from looking at the federal notice, table 2, that's again those guidances that remain in effect for another 180 days and are then discontinued, lists the enforcement policy for remote digital pathology devices. So again, this is an unusual but not completely unexpected event where digital pathology is in this section of that table. Now, of course, many of you may ask, what are we going to do? So there's 3 approaches to tackle this. And again, we share this, of course, with everyone here. The first one is by looking at the actual enforcement policy for remote pathology, where a specific scope is the intended use for use in remote reviewing and reporting of digital pathology slides, was exempted or was addressed. And within that realm or within that focus, there are these 4 components, meaning the digital image manual interpretation microscope. Here are the product codes. And then the whole slide imaging system, also known as the scanner, the image viewing and management software, also known as the PACS or image management IMS system, and then the actual digital pathology display, aka the monitor. These were the components that were in this particular enforcement discretion policy that is now being discontinued. So the approach is, of course, to really define what is attached to these product codes and what is needed to be done to potentially expand the intended use to account for remote review. And there's, of course, probably many points that we can discuss there. Approach 2 is, of course, to look into the transition plan. This is a screenshot of the draft guidance from December 2021. And I think this was in the meantime finalized. It was out there for almost a year before I think it was meant or was made permanent. And in this transition plan is a specific reference to, of course, digital pathology. To be specific, it was the top entry indicating that the FDA was, of course, eagerly eyeing that, what would happen. And there are many recommendations for a transition, and it's called a transition implementation plan. So if a vendor had a scanning system that was under the enforcement discretion that's walked back now, there's specific instructions on how that can be done and what is recommended as a so-called transition implementation plan. That depends on which device of those that we just outlined here is affected. The approach 3 is, of course, a regulatory science approach. So we get to this part in just a second, but PyCC in collaboration with MDIC, and I think we have Noor on the call today, Jitesh may join later, we will organize a meeting entitled PyCC 23. It's an in-person meeting, and we outline the details in just a second, to establish regulatory science approaches and provide resources. And of course, we should discuss some of these topics. So this was a lot of information. Maybe I use that as a brief pause to open this up for discussion, because I believe many of you will be affected by this, at least if you have implemented digital pathology. Can I ask for some comments from the group?
Joe, I'd say, first of all, thanks for putting this together. This is really helpful. I know a lot of these things have come out quite in a contemporary fashion, and they need rapid interpretation. So this is really, really helpful. I think it's useful first to maybe put, to bucket the stakeholders into different buckets, right? There's practice labs, there's manufacturers, and there may be, software manufacturers. So those might handle each of these in a different way, depending on what they're currently doing and actually what they did during the pandemic and what their status was before that. So that's my only thought. Again, thanks for really putting this together. This is really fantastic.
Yeah, I think we had several brainstorming sessions about what and how to do this in terms of like tackling it, because that's one problem. There are many others. So again, this deck will be shared, but maybe as an outline of what this meeting would look like. So we have prepared a few things, and I hope that will account for some of the stakeholder comments you made, Keith. So of course, we agreed at least pre-pandemic that we would do an in-person workshop once a year. That's called our annual PyCC meeting. And jointly with MDIC, we planned a 2-day meeting to meet, identify large-scale projects, and hopefully have impact. We designed a preliminary outline of a meeting where in the first half day, many of the stakeholders, and this is by no means a complete nor a final list, would discuss brief updates, including panel discussions, before a lunch break and discussing some of these issues. We put remote work here. There's also the predetermined change control protocols, statistics and performance measures, but leaving enough space for open topics to really reflect these against some of the legislative and regulatory changes. Then, of course, discuss and narrow down something to 4 topics. There's a networking event and dinner. And then the day 2 would be 2 sessions tackling those 4 agreed upon topics, really with like the appropriate time with those experts that are interested in that, given people the opportunity, for example, to jump from topic 1 to topic 3 to just account for some of those shared interests. The topics would be jointly presented to everyone. We would use Mentimeter to capture the audience response and ideas, and then narrow it down to a selected project A and B to hopefully have in the end a synergy towards one key project that is most meaningful. I can't tell you what that might be, but I think the idea to work on one project that might be appealing to many stakeholders, including, of course, the regulator, and with broad participation by CMS, NIH, CDC, and FDA, that might be a great avenue to narrow down really meaningful projects. Briefly, so aside from the impulse update talks in the beginning, and an audience participation and actively, really shaping these projects, this would be a working meeting. So this is not scientific talks where people applaud in the end. I mean, I hope everyone will applaud for some of those points, but main idea would be that this is really a working meeting where people come together and tackle some of these breakout sessions on some of the topics that are interesting. So I will spare you going over each of the breakout session plans, but please take a look at that. And as a summary, it should really be a workshop. So there is, we transition towards the update from MDIC, but before we do so, maybe the quick part on, location and details to enable a broad participation by many of the government agencies. We had a meeting in 2019 in Arlington. We're not sure if that location will be available, but it will be in the DC area. It will be, of course, a registered event with MDIC. We planned for participation by a maximum of 100 people just to keep it actionable. So, small group sessions of less than or more than 25 usually gets a little inefficient. And of course, there will be 2 lunches, dinner, etc. served. And the date, again, June 27th, 28th. Now, I transition this over to the MDIC updates and leave up sort of the one-page summary. And maybe, Ulla, you can launch the questionnaire here, because we wanted to make this transparent in terms of who would be interested, and then of course to cover some of the costs that we don't have to get the food, etc. There might be a fee related to this. So there's a poll that should show up on your computer screen now, and if you could please take a moment to think about whether you're interested in the meeting and what if the meeting would cost something. And of course the cost is largely related to, the food and of course the location. And, we can maybe hand it over to MDIC for additional comments, but this is sort of the current one-pager that hopefully will get discussion triggered, etc. So maybe, Noor, if you have other things about this to say. Or, of course, big discussion here. Yes.
Do you have a question? Is the FDA allowed to travel yet?
So we locally, I believe, yes, but not really sort of, plane rides across the country, and only with very few exceptions. But I think that's probably a better question for Noor or Jitesh.
I can take that question, and then I'll let Noor to speak. I may have to step out. If FDA can locally travel, but the approval process has been a little different compared to pre-pandemic. So that's one reason we need your input sooner to go through the whole bureaucratic process of approval for FDA folks. Local meetings, yes, I mean, a lot more reviewers and personnel can join. Whereas if it involves travel to other locations, and that's been approved on a case by case. Of course, senior leadership and office director level or a deputy director, they're all able to travel, attending meetings beginning September 2022. I had some meeting in Boston along with FDA colleagues at that point of time. So they're coming back to speed. But even for a DC meeting, we need to identify the speakers whom we need to invite specifically. And also we need an agenda to, for the interested FDA or other government employees to get their necessary bureaucratic permission. So, and again, the cost here is MDIC, PICC, none of us are looking to generate revenue. This is just barely cover the cost. We recently did some 1 or 2 day event at Arlington or Washington DC area, at Hyatt or Marriott or those kind of allocation, and it cost about $300 or so per head just for the facilities and the catering. And Joe, the location we had the last meeting, unfortunately we cannot get that because that building is getting either demolished or being demolished. That was the world's very first Marriott or second Marriott.
Yeah.
Oh. Maybe we can get a discount if it's not quite demolished yet.
But again, there's another suggestion. If you know a conference facility in and around DC, either academic center or something, where we can cater food, because usually what happens is Hyatt or Marriott, they charge $1,000 per day for the rental, but they will make you to spend $150 to $200 per person for the catering. That will drive up the cost. But if you have other options, again, MDIC can work with you all. So I'm assuming Ula has a poll there and everybody's clicking.
Yeah, we have 76% participation and 74% yes and yes. I think that's a pretty good indication that this might be a good idea. I think we can probably send this out to the larger community, not just the steering committee, and hear back what everyone thinks. Here's the final poll. I think it's also, of course, an issue about the date. I know it's very busy. People have a lot of stuff on their agenda. There are many meetings happening. But on the other hand, looking at the timeline of the end of the public health emergency and some of the relevant regulatory changes, it might be timely to at least discuss how to, for example, collect all the real world data that we have generated over the pandemic. And, those more practical things, I believe, cannot be tackled by any individual investigator. So,
Joe, I just have one more comment before I jump off. I know it's an in-person meeting, mostly we are designing and defining it as a workshop kind of meeting, working group meeting. But if we are trying to use this as an avenue to, give some promotional, get some promotion for PICC and bring some new audience, either to the meeting or just get that awareness, should we consider having some title for the event over and beyond what is written here? Because MDIC, maybe people don't know about it. PICC, people may not know about it. PICC annual meeting, again, people may not know it. So I think there's an opportunity there to have a title for people who are not familiar at all with the MDIC or PICC. And those people may not join, but we wanted to kind of get people to read about it.
We've been not asking people, but I know we have representation from DPA, CAP, many of the professional organizations. I know Friends of Cancer Research, I see Brittany. I think a title, happy to add. I think it's more of a way to disseminate this. I think in our local personal network. So Niels, thank you for your message. It would be, of course, great to share this with people. And our personal networks, but I would say also we need to tap into our professional and also industry communication. I'm not sure whether there's a way to announce this through the FDA route that we need to explore. But I think if we have a brief website, or we can put that on the PyCC website and then share it through all the different professional societies that are members and the member organizations, I think we reach a fairly broad audience. Anyone a good suggestion for a title? Jitesh, I think we have to have our own little project for getting a title done.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to nail down today, but we have to work on it. And then there's another point that FDA may be a little hesitant in general for the very first goal examine, because the words are regulatory and legislative changes. That generally, it's kind of guarded area, right? So promotional wise, they may not do it, but of course, they will be happy to join to discuss.
Mm-hmm. We can, of course, wordsmith this. Again, this was sort of the main sort of idea. Please, as always, feel free to put some suggestions in the chat, or text Ulla in the chat, or email us later. I think the MDIC, as you can see here, has a few more additional updates. So thank you, Jitesh, for joining. I know you're very busy. Thanks a lot. And we definitely follow up with hopefully a good title and some of the new updates. Thank you. Noor, do you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you so much for listening in and providing feedback for the MDIC PICC event and meeting that we're planning. And just a few MDIC updates for you all. Today, there was a fireside chat with Andy Fish, our CEO, along with other members of the MDIC Leadership Committee. The event did occur at 1 p.m. today, but if you're interested in listening in to the recording and learning a little bit more about MDIC, please feel free to click the LinkedIn link, and the recording will also be on YouTube as well. And happening tomorrow, Jitesh, along with my coworker Taylor, are hosting a free webinar about the landscape report that they released a few weeks ago, specifically targeting medical device computational modeling and simulation. They will be joined with a whole host of panels, and it'll be a very interesting discussion. So if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to register now. And as mentioned earlier, the benchmarking webinar is available for your consumption on demand. If you're interested, it is up on YouTube, so feel free to click the link in the chat. And lastly, MDIC, the next few slides are MDIC's calls for volunteers across multiple different columns within MDIC, specifically the digital health software vertical. If you're interested in joining or learning more about the work that my coworker Taylor and Jitesh are doing, please feel free to reach out to them both. And this is also just another call for working group members along with volunteers.
So
right.
Today, what we are trying to do is to give an overview of our benchmarking.
I believe someone's unmuted. Awesome. All right, that's all from MDIC. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Noor. I think MDIC is definitely touching upon several of the very meaningful components here. A few other updates in the diversity and inclusion section. We want to highlight two phenomenal women. One is a super informative podcast with Mary Kennedy, who's with the College of American Pathologists. I don't see her on the call today, but I'll see her later this week, so I will definitely relate it to her. If you haven't heard the podcast, it is definitely interesting to hear, and especially with a focus on pathology informatics. The second person we wanted to highlight here, which is covered in a review article, is Mary Kenneth Keller, the first US PhD in computer science. And the review paper is amazing. If you haven't seen it, just to outline what has been accomplished by Mary, and the broad scale of impact that her research and work in computer science has had. So please take a look, and it's definitely worth reading. It's called, I think, The Legacy of Mary Kenneth Keller, and definitely a fantastic outline. A few resources that we wanted to share with the collaborative community. First, and covered in many different elements, is, of course, you heard about large-scale language models. I won't say the one that everyone uses, but in other words, some of the AI has reached the level of language understanding. And there are 3 great papers and/or entries. One is how prior authorization in healthcare has been affected by these large-scale natural language models. There's a great paper in the New England Journal about electronic prior authorization for prescription drugs, using, of course, electronic modalities. And Eric Topol, when MD is a machine doctor, of course, playing with that abbreviation here. But overall, I think Dr. Topol has emphasized several times that the potential is, of course, to increase the time spent with the patient rather than with filling out paperwork. So AI adoption, there's several resources here, and it's definitely interesting to read on that. There's additional news. There is a resource. I think Path Presenter and Pramana are collaborating. I think there's definitely a trend towards DICOM. I think in some press releases we heard that. So if you haven't seen that, please take a look. There's 3 elements. One is an assessment of the global pathology workforce. You can see here a very interesting red belt of dearth of pathologists. Not surprising, but definitely illustrating another factor in terms of remote value generation for pathology. And then there is a so-called Horizon Scan about new precision medicine technologies to watch in 2023. And it's of no surprise that pharmacogenomics, liquid biopsy, etc., population-based genetic screening is in there. But as a first entry here, as you can see, digital tools. So no surprise, of course, the Coalition for Health Artificial Intelligence, or CHAI, has issued an implementation guide for quality assurance and how to implement this. So definitely great resources. Please definitely take a look. Now, this time around, we have received over, I think, 50 publications. They will all be on the website. And this is by no means a prioritization, nor is this emphasizing one over the other paper, but some are just worth mentioning to many on the call. One is a paper by Emma Nolan, New Zealand and Australian group, Peter McCallum, Cancer Center, etc., about a TME deconvolution of breast cancer from biology to clinic, illustrating the multiplicity of approaches to really get to the bottom of how primary tumors deriving from the lobule versus the duct differ, etc. It's a beautifully written paper, and I wanted to present it. It's published in Cell as a leading edge article. Another great paper from the research division in Foundation Medicine is a histology prediction tool for EGFR mutational status. And this is a real-world data set, an extremely large data set with great performance in the above 80 range. You see here even with sort of heat maps of where this comes. So Dr. Pao et al. Have really made it here, and it's a scientific report. One study I would like to go into a little bit more detail is a topic that we have heavily discussed in PyCC just a few years ago, namely in 2021, August, September, and December, when the 21st Century Cures Act went finally live about information blocking. Briefly, this is the rule that prevents now physicians from not releasing information to patients. And Dr. Stites et al. Have published in the JAMA Network article a multi-institutional survey on the perspectives of patients about having immediate access to test results through online patient portals. He surveyed 43,000 patients, of which 8,000 participated. So congratulations to you. We had a 76% participation rate today in our poll. As you can tell in real world data, that's a bit different. So that's a first element to recognize. However, a total of 6,000 of close to 8,000 respondents reported of at least having looked at one test result in the past month, and some of it included imaging or biopsies. That's actually 50%. So just usually we don't go into the data, but I wanted to illustrate. So there's a big attrition rate, but it is a very interesting data set. And when looking at the response, so what's shown here is the proportion sorted by normal versus abnormal or not normal test result across this pseudo-Likert scale that says, I was never worried. And you see there's some discrepancies, but if there's a proportion, less worried or there's no change, you see, for example, a large proportion of people with abnormal results said that, they didn't worry more, but a subset definitely had an increased proportion where they were more worried with abnormal test results and much more worried as well. So clearly there is a predisposition for not being worried in the darker bars, which is the normal test. And if you draw a line over it, you see there's like some skewing. So people are, of course, more worried when they have not normal test results. The part that is really tricky, and we discussed this in many times, is, of course, so 95% of participants who received abnormal test results would like to continue to receive immediate release results. I think that is a key message of the paper, which was a very controversial topic before this information blocking rule came out. And then, a separate qualitative evaluation of free text questions is forthcoming. So I think there will be another paper coming out. And of course, some of the points about, the additional worry or the increased risk for negative emotions has been previously published. But overall, it seems that there's no discrepancy in opinion here with 95%. That's a clear trend towards this is good. And then there's also the issue that a subset of patients have been pre-counseled. So pre-counseling means you may actually get this result. And there was no association between pre-counseling and lower levels of worry. So I think this paper clarifies many of the things that we have discussed in the information blocking project. So we will definitely tie it to this project. And I just wanted to briefly outline this. You may actually need this in your hospitals when some of these topics come up. A great paper from Stanford, Kyle Swanson from James Su's group, had put another leading edge article where, interestingly, the types of advances in machine learning and AI have been classified into different layers. So, is it image-based, etc.? But most importantly, risk versus diagnosis versus treatment selection. So the classic biomarker principles that I believe are very intimately associated with our day-to-day work, because we always deal with, is it more diagnostic, prognostic, or predictive? This enters now the multimodality field. So please take a look. It is an interesting paper. More on the regulatory side, This is a paper by Shannon Thor about the European Medicines Agency and the FDA Parallel Scientific Advice Pathway. So this is, of course, a longer-term project that has received a lot of attention, especially when it came to the global pandemic, etc. But a one approach that is being propagated here is this joint advice from a parallel scientific advice. So many of the devices and drug manufacturers go through both independently, but of course there was a need, can't we just unify and harmonize this? So for example, a typical timeline is provided here. So similar clocks that we're aware of, and here's sort of a comparison. So in this paper, this parallel scientific advice pathway is outlined and explained. So definitely an interesting read from the FDA and the European Medicines Agency. So great work, came out in February. We missed it for the last meeting, but I definitely wanted to share this with the group. A paper in the Archives of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine by Joe Willis et al. Is providing a great overview of a companion diagnostics and some of the arguably confusing issues that happened over the last couple of months and additional approvals. So I think currently there are 7 immune checkpoint inhibitors out there with various PD-L1 assays. And the distinction between companion and complementary diagnostics is made. And you see some quotes here. It's a great overview to also indicate where companion diagnostics in the development process towards a post-market or in-market clinical trials stand, and what that means for the rapidly changing landscape and increasing complexity in this field. As additional antibody drug conjugates appear that are likely all going to be detected using protein biomarkers, I believe the points that the authors make is going to remain highly relevant. Another paper by Dr. Krishnamurthy, I think this came out in the last few days, is a prediction tool for triple-negative breast cancer response to neoadjuvant chemotherapy, with a very good true positive response rate prediction from histology. Need to go back and read this again, what their final performance was, but I think it was for all class 3 and 4 diseases over 80%. Finally, as a paper, which is more an executive summary and a full scientific article from Health Affairs, they have a Council on Healthcare Spending and Value. They call it a roadmap for action. It's actually high-level recommendations from this council. The part that I found most entertaining is the Exhibit 4. It's actually a very interesting read if you're into reimbursement. But as we're looking for reimbursement strategies for digital pathology, the collection and explanation of alternative payment model frameworks in this paper is extremely interesting. It goes all the way from fee-for-service all the way to population-based payments, which is very unusual. But I know many payers are very interested in these to really focus on certain populations that should benefit from a certain technology. And I would say in terms of reimbursement work, this is the most cutting edge that's out there. So if you're interested in that topic, please feel free to read. And we tried to find out some of the authors to possibly have for our payer work group, talk a little about what that would look like. So for example, some of these foundational payments for infrastructure and operations is a super attractive component, because as many of you know, for going digital or for doing AI, you have to invest in a certain infrastructure, and payment models for that are not quite as evolved, and people think on unitary or procedural levels, not yet at so-called fee-for-service linked to quality and value, or infrastructure and operations-based payment. So definitely very interesting. Finally, and then we gonna open it up for questions. Here are a few events of interest. One is there's a DPA, Digital Pathology Association webinar, how to use digital pathology to accelerate the drug development pipeline. I know that topic is of great interest. I know Friends of Cancer Research is writing a white paper on the topic. I believe both are hopefully complementary, but this is a webinar on the topic. If you're interested, please join. There's a few other projects. Our HER2-low project is happening April 7th. Quick pointer, if you're interested in regulatory and pathology leadership, the CAP Pathologist Leadership Summit happens in April 15th to 18th in DC, I believe. And then April 26th is our next PICC meeting. We're still figuring out how we're going to pull this off. We may actually need to do this in a slightly different format, but definitely looking forward to this. So that's the slide deck that will be, of course, shared with all of you and on the website with all the references in case you weren't able to download this immediately here. Let's open it up for questions, concerns, suggestions.
Hey, Joe, Don Van Dyke here. A few meetings ago, we discussed an idea I had about producing a regulatory roadmap, FDA approval roadmap for doing image management systems. And you didn't throw me out of the room, so it got somewhere, but I don't know if we've gotten any further on that.
So a regulatory roadmap for a specific digital pathology
For
solution?
image management systems, digital pathology was the action point.
I think the discussion that we triggered today, I hope, with the clarity that the enforcement discretion will be walked back, affects that specific product code. So for those who are not too familiar what Don is referring to, it's the specific component of that product code that is for image management systems. I believe there's still too much unclear to actually formulate a roadmap. It might be, however, the exact time. So I would suggest that would be a great topic for the PICC in-person meeting to discuss.
So I'm a little confused because there are a couple of IMS systems that have 510K approval. And you're saying that would be walked back? Am I getting that right?
510K will not be walked back. Just the regulatory exceptions about people who do not use 510K image management systems during the pandemic were allowed to do so.
Okay, so mine was the roadmap about the 510K approval.
Maybe I misunderstood. How can, maybe ask the question again and maybe someone can help.
Is there a roadmap for the industry that this group can provide that gives a roadmap of steps and processes to attain 510K approval for IMS?
I believe, if I recall correctly, how to get an approval is not really a regulatory science question. The roadmap, I think the closest that we got into was what we did with the decision summary review session for the prostate Gleason, the PAGE prostate algorithm, where we got representatives from the agency as well as from the regulatory team of the company together to outline selected topics from their decision summary. Now, a great start is any decision summary. So if you look at the product code QKQ, there are decision summaries out there for the systems that you mentioned. Now, deriving a roadmap in terms of a concrete product with your intended use statement, etc., from that, I would say falls a little bit outside the scope of a regulatory science initiative and more into the realm of regulatory affairs people with regulatory guidance. However, asking those questions that are pertinent for what does an image viewing and management system actually entail? Can it operate with DICOM? What are the standards? Should there be a harmonized approach for image management? Those are the key, I would call it, scientific questions. So it is relevant now because I believe many people have implemented workflows and may not have chosen a 510(k) approved image management system, but diverted to other ways of sorting your data. Now that might be homegrown, that might be customized. It might also be a research use only application. But what sort of those guardrails are that are typically looked at in a 510(k), I think the best part to illustrate is to do probably something similar to the Page prostate. But I'm not sure if that's what you're asking or if that would be helpful.
Okay. Message received. I appreciate your time.
We could also host a session separate if you're willing to share your time to discuss that with people who are interested in the IMS topic. I'm sure there are many. I'm just not sure how to tackle it in the larger scale group. But usually we branch out these projects. So maybe I'll shoot you an email and
Okay.
we can put that on the list and then just solicit. Sometimes we just meet with 3-4 people and tackle some of the topics, and that works really well because you get the actual domain experts on that topic that are really engaged in it.
It sounds terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? All right. I think we're at the top of the hour. Thank you very much. I hope to see you at the end of April. And by then, we hopefully have a lot of news about the meeting in June. And I hope to see you all there in person. Thank you very much.